Whiteout Hamster says, my old two-stroke runs cooler at wide open throttle. Mind you, I've only got a small 77 Johnson, 15 horsepower, and a smaller 89 Johnson, 2 horsepower, which begs the question, what temperature should an outboard run at? Whiteout Hamster, thank you for commenting and subscribing. This is a great topic. We want to thank our sponsor, PartsView.com, for proudly sponsoring this podcast and bringing it to you. They are truly a marine parts and outboard superstore. They offer 120-hour, 300-hour maintenance kits for Yamaha, Mercury, Suzuki outboards, and Mercury's products with all the necessary parts for your specific engine model in one convenient package. You can check them out and save money using the coupon codes in the link in the description below. As far as the temperature goes for the outboards, it is all based on the model. I would say in general that an outboard is going to run between 120, 130 up to about 160-ish, depending on your engine model. Somewhere in there is about where it is going to run based on the model, based on the thermostat. So if you are talking about a two-stroke and a 77 Johnson 15 horse, the reason it is going to run cooler at wide open throttle, first of all, think about the water temperature that you're running in. If you're running in a lake in the middle of Michigan where the water temperature is 40 degrees, 50 degrees, 60 degrees, 65 during the summer, 70, depending on how hot it has been that summer, that is going to reflect on how quickly the engine cools. When it comes to smaller outboards like the 15 horsepower, the 2 horsepower, at wide open throttle, your thermostats are open and you are running a lot of water through the engine. I mean, you're probably going to have on a smaller engine, maybe 15, 20 PSI coming off of the impeller of water pressure. So that is going to flow a lot of water through the engine very quickly. Honestly, there is the effect of too much water too quick. The water is not able to pull heat from the engine and then remove it because the water is just flowing too quickly. But generally, by and large, at wide open throttle, all the engines are going to run a little bit cooler because of that. It's going to be flowing a lot of water really quickly, helping to cool the engine down a lot. So if the thermostat on the 15 horse is, let's say it's 135 degrees, I don't really know what the exact temperature is. It's going to be in that range, like 130 to 155, somewhere in there, depending on the model. Usually they're somewhere around that range. So at wide open throttle, that thermostat at that temperature, let's say it's 135, it opens up at 135 and it's just flowing a lot of water. So your engine could run cooler. I mean, it could be down into the 120s because it's flowing so much water and the water temperature of the lake that you're running in is so cold. Whereas in contrast, if you're running in, say, the Caribbean or South Florida, something like that, where you're running in water temperatures of 85, 90 degrees sometimes in the middle of summer, that's not going to cool the engine as well. So you might be closer to the 135 or maybe even a little bit above that because you're running wide open throttle. When it comes to larger outboards, like let's say a 300, for instance, most 300s, like if you're a Mercury, it's running the thermostats at 143. So generally the block temperature is right there. I mean, it is usually really close to 143, 145, 142, depending on, again, the water that you're running in, as well as what speed you're running at. The cooling and the cooler at running at wide open throttle isn't really as much of a factor at those larger horsepower model types because it is a way bigger block. You're talking about a 1-cylinder 9 horse or something like that, a 2 horsepower 1-cylinder outboard, that's this big compared to a 300 horsepower 6-cylinder that's got a big block on it. It's going to need a lot more water to flow through there, so the flow of the water isn't going to be nearly as quick as it is on the smaller power head. So you won't get that cooler effect generally with the larger horsepower outboards. You shouldn't be running 10 degrees below the temperature that the thermostat is running opening up at, because you need a lot of volume of water to flow through that power head. So the cooling, it doesn't really run, it doesn't work like that. It's just the physics of it. You've got a wide open throttle. Most of the time you're going to see 25 PSI of water coming off of your impeller on a brand new impeller, maybe a little bit more than that depending, but generally that amount of pressure, it still takes a lot of water to go into the power head, fill it, and then dump it out the exhaust. Also, you've got your bypasses, which will dump water out the exhaust to help regulate that temperature. So the larger horsepower outboards usually run really, really close to where the thermostat opens up when everything's running normal, and if you're running in, say, 70, 75 degree water. Again, if you're running in 40 degree water or you're running in 90 degree water, that's going to play a major factor in what temperature the engine is going to run for at wide open throttle over a consecutive, say, 15, 20, an hour, how long you run the engine. But that's generally what it's going to be. If you're seeing 170, 175, that is way too hot. You have an overheat problem. You have blockage somewhere. That's kind of also another way to see if you have blockages somewhere. Like, let's say you've got an engine where the thermostat opens up at 145 or 150, and you are consecutively running. If you've been monitoring it, and let's say 2 years ago, the engine always 150 all the time, always 150. Now, 2-3 years later, the engine's running 160, 162. It's just higher. That is an indication of a hot spot somewhere, probably close to where your temperature sensor is, that is like in the head or somewhere around there, usually around the cylinders. That's generally where we'll see a hot spot, meaning that around the cylinders, the cylinder walls on the outside, that's where your water jackets are, and there's cooling water that runs along the sides of the cylinder. Generally, if you're getting a hot spot that is bringing that temperature up to 10 degrees, 12 degrees above where it was normally running at that 150 mark, then you've probably got some sand, you got some dirt, you've got some shells, something there in one of those passages on the sides of the cylinders, and that's what's creating the hot spot, which is bringing that temperature up. And monitoring that and being able to see that and be like, oh, my engine's, it's not overheating, so it's not like you've got a problem yet, but you're noticing that the temperature is coming up consecutively with no changes. Like, you haven't done anything, you haven't changed thermostats, you haven't done anything, you've been on top of your maintenance, but you're noticing that it's running 10, 12 degrees hotter than it normally was. You've probably got a blockage, and it is something that you're going to want to address. But if you're seeing 175, 180, that's too hot. Also remember, there are different temperatures depending on the engine that you can see. You can see oil temp, you can see block water temp, you can see head temp. Like, there are different temp sensors on the engine depending on what engine model that you have. So make sure that you're looking at the right one, because if you're looking at oil temperature and you're thinking that you're looking at water temperature, totally different, because your oil temperature is going to be way higher. Your oil temperature is going to be in the 200s depending on the engine and depending on what RPM you're running. So make sure that you are looking at water temp or block temp compared to oil temp, because oil temp is going to be a lot hotter. That's just what it is. B. Miller says, is there any comparison on the Suzuki 300 single prop compared to the dual prop? I am repowering my C Sport 24 XL that's pretty heavy and can't decide between the two. Thanks. So for me personally, the 300 Suzuki is a great product, and it's been around a lot more than the 350. It's a little bit more seasoned, I guess you would call it, than the 350. They do have the duo prop and the single prop for the 300. The 350 usually is that duo prop. So as far as the C Sport 24, that's a heavier boat. I want to say that has a cabin in the front of it. I can't remember 100%, but I want to say that's got a cabin. So yeah, it's a heavier boat. I guess it depends on what you're looking for. I would personally go with the single just because the duo prop, I'm not the biggest fan. There are advantages to the duo prop. You do get a lot better bite. You get performance aspects of it, slow speed, your maneuverability when you're turning, especially with a boat like that. I don't know if that boat has a bracket, like boats that have a cabin in the front and a bracket on the back, your maneuverability it's not great. Let's put it that way. Cabin boats with a cabin in the front and a bracket in the back, by and large, slow speed maneuverability in a tight quarter area there's a lot to be desired there. You don't have very good maneuverability just because of the bracket and the transom and the weight in the front of the boat. When you go to try and reverse and turn around, the water is coming off of the lower unit and it's going under the bracket and it's basically just hitting the transom. So you're getting very limited turning ability because of that. And that goes for most bracket boats. Though center consoles, stuff that don't have a lot of weight in the front, that you're not trying to swing that weight in the front, you get a little bit better maneuverability. But when you add the weight of the cabin in the front, it really messes with the turning radius of the engine or the boat. But as far as the comparison between the 300 and the single versus a duo, I kind of like simplicity. Duo props have a lot to offer as far as performance aspects and, your whole shot, maneuverability of your boat in tight quarters, because you've got that extra thrust of that secondary prop, but you have added complication to your lower unit. It is not a simple single prop shaft with a single drive shaft, pinion, forward, reverse gears. Like, lower units are fairly simple for the most part. And whenever you add that secondary prop shaft and that second prop, there's a lot going on there. You have a lot more seals. You got a lot more going on. And I like the simplicity of the single. That's a personal opinion of mine. It's not to say that the duo prop has a bunch of problems. Though when it first came out, it did have a bunch of problems. I'm pretty sure that they've got most of this stuff resolved at this point in time, but there was issues with the duo prop when it first came out. For that reason, if you want the performance aspect of the duo prop, then go with it. If you've got a good dealer nearby, go with it. But if you want just straight up simplicity, because simplicity brings reliability. It's something that I try to rely more on reliability than I do for performance aspects, depending on what you want. And so for that reason, I like the simplicity of the single prop. So my opinion is I would go with the single, because you can always prop it based on the boat. With the thousands of different propping options that you have, you can generally get the performance aspects that you want from your boat with the single prop. Do you really need the duo prop? That's kind of my opinion on it. I'm sure you can find people on both sides that own both products that are very, very happy with it. So if you wanted that extra, performance and maneuverability, go with the duo prop. Otherwise, I'm sticking the single. Deep Dive SC, I'm guessing South Carolina. Can you not put a jack plate on the bracket and then you can lower or raise the motor for optimal performance, plus minus 6 to 10 inches, depending on the jack plate? That way, exact placement of the engine bracket isn't as critical, plus minus an inch or two. 100%. Well, let me rephrase that. Not 100%, but basically 100%. Putting a jack plate on a bracket that's on a boat, by and large, awesome, phenomenal. Gives you a lot better. Going back to what we were talking about with the maneuverability of the bracketed boat with a tight quarters and not having that maneuverability, with the jack plate, you can lower the engine down, which is going to give you you're going to be able to move that water under the boat and not hit the transom. So you're going to get more maneuverability. And then obviously whenever you put it in reverse, you want to trim it up and kind of, lift the back of the boat out of the water. But those are just, how you use the engine and how you control it based on what you're trying to do. There's different techniques that you can do to control the boat better in tight quarters, but that's besides the fact. The jack plate on the bracket, yes, you can do that. If you have a sketchy transom, if you have a transom that is 35 years old with the bracket and it's getting sketchy, you're going to add torque because with the jack plate, you're now getting more of a setback, and the farther back you go from the transom, the more torque you're getting. It's just leverage. So if you've got a sketchy transom and you're overpowering the boat, then you might not want to do the jack plate. But for the vast majority of situations, the jack plate on the bracket is a really, really good option, and it gives you a lot of performance benefits. And most of the transoms, if your transom is holding the bracket and the engine package already, generally it can take the jack plate too. So yes, I would say yes, depending on the boat. If the boat's sketchy and the setup is already pretty sketchy and you're overpowering and that kind of deal, those variables, without saying those variables, then yeah, the bracket and the jack plate, they'll work together. Tons of performance benefits to doing that as well. Mr. Insanity Flea says, sorry, this is a bit random. My buoyancy foam has sealed the screw-in lids on my inspection hatches. The buoyancy foam has gotten into the threads. I've tried really hard to open them, but they are stuck fast. Without destroying the lid, any methods I could use? Otherwise, I guess I could just destroy the lid and purchase a new one. They are pretty cheap. Yes, over time, I highly doubt that it's the foam that is messing with the lid. If we're talking about a screw-in lid, like you've got an access plate with a pie hole cover and a lid that screws in, I can almost bet that if there's no foam or nothing like that that is, sticking that into place. Pretty much what the problem with the screw-in lids is that you screw them in, there's O-rings there, but dirt and water and other stuff does still kind of get in there, and it washes stuff in there, and they lock up. I mean, over time with heat and moisture and expansion, they basically weld themselves together because the pie hole cover changes in its shape and its form because of the heat and the age. Let's say it expands, it wedges itself in there. So without destroying it, you can try and use a chisel and hammer it out, or you can also get a pie hole cover remover. They make those where there's two little nipples on a longer handle with one arm that folds out like this that'll fit down into the notches, and you can get leverage on it. So trying to use one of those, otherwise, yeah, there might be 20, 30, 40 bucks, whatever, depending on the type of access port you have. You got to destroy it and replace it. If we're talking about a different kind of access where, let's say that it's not the screw in, but it is, there's nothing in there. Let's say it's a piece of fiberglass and it's glass down, or not glass down, but sealed down. That could be foam. But an access, when you have access ports on the deck, generally they are access to something. So there's usually not an access port that has foam behind it, because what's the point of having that access there? Usually, if there's an access port, there is something there. A fuel sender, the fuel tank hose, or a live well, a pump, a bilge. There's something that the access port is giving you access to. It's generally not got foam behind it. It's generally 4,200 or 5,200 that someone put down that pie hole cover with, and the sealant is not allowing you to get it up. And on those, same thing, you have to use some kind of pry bar or something like that and hammer it in there and try and work your way around it to get that seal, that adhesive, to come up in order to get in there. So not sure which one of those you are. Rock says, in your opinion, do compression check numbers increase if tested on a warm engine? And if so, by about how much is the increase in PSI on a warm engine? Thank you. In my opinion, so realistically, a compression test is done to figure out usually you don't need to do a compression test on an engine unless there is a problem. Like by and large, a compression test is only on very old engines that we are suspecting that there's a problem with, or you want to see, is there a problem with the engine? You're trying to see, are the compression numbers really low, meaning that you've got, blow by, you've got problems with the rings, you got problems with your valves, you got carbon buildup, stuff like that. It's generally, you want to see if there's a difference between cylinders. Number 1 and number 3 has a 20% difference. This one's 120, this is 95, that kind of thing. You're trying to see, is there a legitimate issue with the engine, and is it, do we have a problem here? Or if you have a problem with the engine, is there zero compression in this cylinder? Like you're diagnosing a problem. So the way you use a compression check is generally for that. You're trying to diagnose something or see if there's an issue. A warm engine versus a cold engine. A warm engine, that's how you should do a compression check. When you do a compression check, you should do it on a warm engine because the rings they've heated up. There's oil on everything. Everything's lubed up. That's generally the way you do a compression check because you're going to get the best and truest numbers. Whereas on a cold engine, your rings haven't expanded. They haven't heated up. You could have, a lack of lubrication in certain areas. It's just not the best thing to do. So if you take a cold engine that has not been running and you do a compression check by just turning the engine over, you're turning over a dry engine. That you don't want to do in general, period. You're going to want to put some lubricant into the cylinder so that way you get lube and oil on all the rings and on all the cylinder walls. You don't want to have any kind of scratching or any kind of issue because you're doing it cold, basically, theoretically. You know what I'm saying? You're 99 times out of 100, you're not going to do any damage. But that's kind of the problem of a cold versus a warm. Is the warm, your rings have heated up and you've got lubrication on everything. Cold, your rings have not heated up and you don't have lubrication on everything. But as long as you put lubrication into the cylinders, a cold engine, you're going to still get very similar numbers. The numbers are in general going to be very close to the same, maybe a little bit less, but not like, you're not going to have a difference of, let's say 120 and at warm. At cold, you're not going to see 95 or 85 or, some astronomically low number. That's an indication of a serious issue. So by and large, if you did see something like that, you need to heat that engine up to make sure that you don't have an issue. But by and large, 99 times out of 100, your compression numbers are going to be very close. Something else to think about is opening up your throttle plates. You want to take your handle and open it all the way up, open up the throttle plates to allow air to get into the engine because you're going to get a lot higher numbers with more volume of air being allowed to get into the engine. So like take a Yamaha, for instance. If you do a compression check on the engine and you see 140 to 160 compression and you open up your throttle plates and you see 180, 190, there's a big difference there because you've opened up your throttle plates. But as far as the warm versus cold and the numbers being completely different, they're not going to be as much as you might think they are because, again, what you're doing with the compression check is you're just checking the compression of the engine. The cylinder's coming up and down, it's pulling air into the cylinder, and the piston is compressing it. As long as there's not a problem with the rings, it's going to make compression. Now, the numbers, so let's say it is a difference, and at cold you got 120 PSI on 3 cylinders, and at warm you got 125 PSI on cylinders. That doesn't make a difference on what you're trying to legitimately do with a compression check and find a problem or be able to, say whether this is a viable engine or not. So in my opinion, do it warm, but if you have to get compression on a cold engine, then your numbers are still going to give you the same outcome, whether or not it's cold or warm. if you see a big problem, 120/95, okay, you have a legitimate concern here. You need to warm that engine up and recheck those numbers and make sure that there's not a problem, like, a ring didn't get stuck or something like that. So that's my opinion and what I can say about it. Project 6 says drill a bigger hole that you can get your drill bit through to mount into the boat so you don't have to take apart when you need to take it out. This is a phenomenal suggestion. Thank you, Project 6. I will be definitely doing that. This is talking about the battery tray that we made for the Key West in the center console. Any boat like this, small boats, flats boats, bay boats, 17-foot boats, these smaller boats that have tiny consoles, you're limited on space on all these types of boats. So we made a battery shelf to stick our batteries on so that way we can fit them inside the console, and that covers up our access to the fuel tank. So what we're going to do is, like he said, drill bigger holes in that so that way we can screw that thing to the deck. But when we need to move it or take it out, all we got to do, opposed to having to take the whole shelf off from the legs, we could just pull the batteries out and be able to get to those screws through the top of it. Love the suggestion. Thank you, Project 6. We'll be doing that. Dean says, I have a 1989 Johnson 28 SPL that, as far as my knowledge, has only been ran in fresh water. Would there be a need to flush a freshwater motor? Yes. So just because you have fresh water doesn't mean that there isn't minerals and stuff in the water. You can still have, point in case, the problem of the contamination between the different lakes, whatever, I can't remember the exact name of the species or the mussels or whatever it is that are getting transferred from one lake to another lake that is eating away the ecosystems of one lake. I can't think of that off the top of my head, but for that reason, you should be flushing it, because if you're running in water, let's say it's brackish freshwater, or let's say it's just water that has a lot of minerals in it. So you're going to get buildup in your engine no matter what the water you're running in, because water has minerals, and those minerals, depending on where you're at, that creates buildup, whether that be algae, whether that be, whatever it may be, you're going to get buildup of those mineral deposits. So flushing your freshwater ran engine is a good thing depending on the engine or the water that you're running in. If you're running on a clean lake with fresh water, then you're not really going to be doing much as far as flushing it. So in those situations, no, you're probably not going to do much. If you're running in water that has a lot of minerals and stuff like that, then yes, you will be doing something with flushing it. My experience, by and large, most people running in freshwater lakes, stuff like that, they don't flush their engines and they have no problems, and they are running engines that are 40, 50 years old. So per the evidence, not really. You probably don't need to, but there are situations where you could. So I would say some situations, yes. Other situations, you're probably not doing all that much. And no, I'm sure there are people out there. For one, you're running a 1989 28 SPL, and you're talking almost 24 on 11. You're talking a 35-year-old engine, so obviously there's no problems yet. Kelly Moore, white shoe polish will fix it right up. Someone else also mentioned SEM. We're talking about the upholstery and fixing old upholstery. This is a great option. I did not even think about that, getting some white shoe polish. I'm actually going to do that. So that is going to be one of the things that I want to do. Is I think I'm going to try that SEM paint too, just so I can have both of them. But awesome advice. White shoe polish, or whatever kind of polish that, whatever color your cushion is, that's a really good tip. Thank you, Kelly Moore. And also the person that said the SEM paint, or the something color, duplicolor upholstery paint. I've never tried any of that stuff, so I'd really appreciate everybody giving those comments. And that is definitely something that we need to try when it comes to the upholstery on that 17, and seeing if we can, bring that back to life and how long it's going to last with that paint. Brindy C says, I recently sprayed my cushions with the duplicolor. That's what I was just thinking about. The vinyl spray paint, cleaned them really well beforehand and scuffed them lightly with 220. cleaned again with acetone, and then did multiple light coats. They look great, and it has probably been 6 months so far, and they're holding up well. So boom, that's exactly what I was talking about. The Duplicolor. I want to try all three. I want to do this. I want to do this, the SEM paint. I want to do the Duplicolor. I want to do the shoe polish. That way we can have an actual like comparison on all three of them. I think that would be a great video. And I mean, it probably wouldn't do that well as far as views, but as far as research and giving people a visit, a visual display or experiment or example, I think that would do really well. So thank you, Brendy C. You're the one that said the Duplicolor. I'm going to try and do all three of those and see what it really looks like in the end between the three different ones. I think there's also a couple other ones that I have to try. So I'm going to need some more cushions, I guess. Anthony says, hey, Aaron, need video on how to diagnose, how to repair, how to replace trim tab pump. I diagnosed it and have power at harness, power to solenoids, but nothing happening. So as far as, so Anthony, we do actually have this type of content in the program. So if you join the Boaters program, we do have these types of videos. They are not really that well performing when it comes to YouTube. So a lot of times some of the really base how-to videos we've made in the program. So if you join the program in all the courses, there's a lot of videos. Actually, there's over 100 some videos in there of this exact type of situation, running through all the circuits and all that. They kind of show this stuff, but the how-to videos, I mean, a lot of them, they do well on YouTube, but as YouTube has changed the algorithm, they don't do that well anymore. When it comes to the trim tab pump, though, yes. So depending on what the pump was that was in there and what pump you put in there after you changed it, they might have different control wires. So the wire colors could have changed. The way the setup might be could have changed. The way the circuitry is ran on the pump could have changed. But in general, it's all the same. You're controlling a relay that controls high voltage. You're running a hydraulic pump that requires a lot of amperage, so that uses, high amp power, or let's say high power, to control the pump, but you control that high power using a relay. And the relay uses, low power coming from a button to control the solenoid. The button activates the solenoids. The solenoids then allow the power to flow from one solenoid to the other solenoid to move the pump in one direction or the other direction, because it's a hydraulic pump, and hydraulics is just moving fluid going this way or going this way. That's all it is. Hydraulic steering, you're going this way or you're going this way. Hydraulic trim pump, you're going this way or you're going this way. And then trim tab pumps, it's a hydraulic pump. You're either going this way or you're going this way. The way that flows is basically the way the pump is, running in reverse or running in forward, done by the voltage using the solenoids. So the solenoids are working together. Power goes in one and it uses the other as the ground to go in one direction, or it reverses, power going into one and using the other one as the ground. So that way it can go in both directions using that high power going to it. The way those solenoids are rigged up is how that works. So the power going to the solenoid for the control, one's going to control one relay and the other relay. So when you go up, it switches those relays depending on, which direction you're pushing the button. The wire colors are going to change depending on the brand and depending on who wired it up in the beginning, as well as the boat manufacturer, because, there are all kinds of different variables. Is there a tower on the boat? Is there two different stations? What kind of pump is it using? Are there buttons? Are there rocker switches? Is it a control pad? I mean, there's a lot of different brands and different styles and different manufacturers. They will wire it up the way that they want it to work on their boat based on, whatever brand. This brand boat has trim tab buttons at the upper station and at the lower station, and they use a duplex to get the wires to the upper station, and it's just using a junction bar in order to connect those, and from the junction bar it goes back to the trim pump. So there are a lot of variables in there in order to make a video like that. It's more about the brand and the type of pump, but they're the same. The pump functions the same regardless of the wire colors. It's just the way that the relays are set up. And so you're going to have to just pull out the manual for whichever brand that you got in order to see how it uses those relays, because some relays are like this, some relays are like this, some have breaker blocks that go back and forth. So it's pretty much the same system, but set up in a different way based on the manufacturer. KMMG says, what glues / epoxy do you use for PVC board, Starboard, and Kusa boards? So those are completely different products. And I mean, we just did a video about Starboard, acrylic, and PVC board, which are all basically a plastic. Acrylic is, the most dense. Starboard is HDPE, or high density polyethylene board. And PVC is that polymer chloride or polychloride, whatever it is, polyvinyl chloride PVC board. So as far as glues and epoxy, Kusa, throw Kusa out because Kusa is different. Kusa board is a building material. So it is a coring material that accepts resin or epoxy. It's used with fiberglass. It is a coring board that you lay fiberglass on to create, a fiberglass structure. So Kusa is made to accept, epoxy resin or polyester resin. It's a fiberglass product. I would not include that in with Starboard, PVC, or acrylic. As far as the epoxy or the acrylic goes, pretty much nothing sticks to acrylic. You basically, I'm not 100% sure on what it is. It is I forget what they call it, that you pour on the acrylic. It might be polyweld, but there's something else. There's like a I can't think of what it is. There is a specific, I think Weldon is the company that makes it. It's a solution where you put the two pieces of acrylic together and you can pour that stuff in there. And it basically, I guess the best way to say is that it melts the two pieces. So if you scratch this side of the acrylic and you don't scratch the other side, when you pour that solution in there, it basically melts the two together, and that scratched surface, it bonds them together basically. I can't think on the top of my head what that is, but acrylic, that's like the only thing to do with acrylic. Other than that, nothing really sticks to it. Elastomeric is the best thing. So using an elastomeric product, but 4200, 5200, Life Seal, Boat Light, none of that stuff. Silicone, realistically, in my opinion, silicone really shouldn't even be used on a boat. I don't really like using silicone. I like using Boat Life, 3M, 4200, 5200, 4000, Fast Cure, or not Fast Cure, but Hardware, whatever it is. Total Boat, Elastomeric, that kind of stuff. I use those products. I don't really like silicone. Silicone's a different type of product. But Starboard, same thing. Elastomeric is going to be the best thing to stick to it, but you can use JB Weld plastic weld, or you can use tap poly weld. Those are going to be the two things. If you want to stick two pieces of Starboard together, that HDPE, those are basically the only two products that I could think of off the top of my head that work and that will glue those two pieces together. The other option is going to be a plastic welder, which takes, it's basically you take a plastic and it melts plastic, and it's basically a welder. You weld it. You can run a bead of plastic and that will stick Starboard together. Plastic weld. That's how you would fix, Triumphs or Ropaline or Propylene, whatever that, those boats are made out of, the plastic boats. That's what you would use to fix those. And then when it comes to the PVC board, it's PVC. You could use PVC cement. You could use tap weld, poly weld. Any of that stuff's going to work to stick the stuff together. Mark Twain says, does this happen even to motors that flushed after every saltwater trip? Talking about flushing and buildup. And yes, kind of like what our other question was about using, flushing in freshwater. Yes, you're going to get buildup no matter what. If you're running in salt water, using something like Saltaway is a great product that dissolves the salt. It's going to prolong and keep the buildup to the minimal, but getting mineral buildup and, just different stuff building up inside the engine is just kind of that's just what it is when you're running raw water through the engine. It's going to happen because we're talking about the temperature of the engine in the first question here, and the temperature of the engine. Let's say that the engine is running at 150 degrees, and when you get somewhere, the engine is 150 degrees. You turn that engine off, all that water that's inside the engine at 150 degrees, it does not take long for that water to evaporate and go away. Whenever you take water and boil it and evaporate it, the minerals in the deposit and the salt all stays behind. The water evaporates and you have all those minerals and all that stuff that sticks behind. And whenever you have a hot engine at 140, 130 degrees, it's that temperature is heating up the mineral. If you're in the Keys, it's lime, it's calcium. Depending on where you are, the minerals that are in the water are left behind, and now you are cooking them. So you're cooking that on to the metal, and it's basically welding those minerals to the metal, and now over time those minerals are going to eat away at the metal. So when you freshwater flush, you're basically thinking that depending on what kind of fresh water you have, if you've got good, clean fresh water that you have there at your house or whatever, and you flush the engine, you are trying to wash away those minerals. And with the engine being cooler now, it's not running, so it's not as hot. Any of those minerals, you're washing as much of them out as you possibly can. So yes, no matter what you do, Mark, you're going to have buildup. If you're running in a really high salinity type water, like down in the Keys where you got calcium, you got lime, you got salt, it's hot water, and you're running hot engines, using a product like Saltaway that dissolves that salt and basically just dissolves it away, that's going to be the best to prevent anything. But over time, you're going to get buildup. It's just what it is. Ivan Merkev, Ivan, I'm murdering your name, sorry. The PVC is very light to work with, but bear in mind it does not tolerate heat. I had it on my boat painted in dark gray. It almost melted away, lost form, and I live in Germany. It is not so hot here in the summer. So there you go. We were just talking about this in that video that came out the other day. It'll be a few weeks ago when this video comes out. But PVC, again, it has a melting point of 185 degrees, and you painted a dark gray. So you've got this PVC dark gray that the PVC board will melt at 185. It's going to disform at, say 160 or so. And you painted that with a dark gray. And yeah, if that's sitting out in the sun in the middle of the day, I bet it's 140 degrees in the middle of summer. And with that heat constantly like that, with that dark gray, it could get even hotter. So there you go. It will disform. I don't like using PVC board outside of a compartment inside. It's also, it's just not as durable as starboard. And yeah, you use it only for making shelves or stuff inside the boat where it's going to be protected. If you try and use it outside the boat, you're asking for trouble, just like Ivan had happened to his boat. Brandon Powerstroke says, hey, unrelated, but I'm looking to repower my Dusky soon. I love a Dusky. Brandon, awesome boat. Would you go with 2 Mercury 300s or Yamaha 300s if it was your personal boat? So there are so many variables in this question, Brandon. For me personally, I like both engines. I love a Mercury 300 and I love a Yamaha 300. The Mercury 300, performance-wise, weight-wise, the features with the engine, its fuel economy, everything about the engine on paper is outstanding. All of the stuff that Mercury has as far as electronics goes, with JPO, with the steering, with the SmartCraft, with the gauges, with the interfaces, with all of the information that the engine gives you as far as the temperature of the engine, the block, the trim, everything about the engine is basically visible on a display. So you can see everything that's going on with the engine. The Mercury 300 is outstanding. Super powerful, super torquey. But I would say a con is they don't like to sit. So on the Yamaha 300, same thing. You got Hellmaster EX. You got all kinds of features with it. Reliability is the number one on that. It doesn't have the best fuel economy. The Mercury fuel economy is going to beat that Yamaha 300 any day of the week. But that 4.2 liter is a stupid reliable engine. I mean, that platform is outstanding, and it does have power. It's got torque. It's got, it's a good, powerful engine just the same. It's a V6. It's not a V8. So you are comparing a V8 to a V6, but both of them, I'm a fan of both if you can't tell. On my personal boat, I think it comes down to how you run the engine. How do you run the boat? If you use the boat a lot, if you're putting a lot of time on the boat, you're putting a lot of hours on it, and you're using it very regularly, I would go with the 300 Mercuries because of the performance aspects. Your fuel economy and the performance of the engines, if you're using it all the time, you're going to save a ton of money because of the performance and the fuel economy. If you're not using the engine or using the boat that much, I would go with the Yamahas because they will take sitting a lot better. And also, you're not as worried about the fuel economy because, you're not using it as much, as well as that 4.2. It's like a guarantee that thing is going to last years and years and years and years. And reliability. I mean, you've got reliability in the bag. So that's the way I guess I would answer that question because, I would take either one. I like both. The 300 4.2 liter is probably a lot easier to work on. The Yamaha is I'm saying the Yamaha is going to be a lot easier to work on than the Merc 300 just because accessibility to it is a lot better. The 300 is got a lot packed into that V8 all in a tight package. So there is that to consider. But outside of that, that's the way I guess I would answer that question with those two compared next to each other. One other thing that I would also consider is the weight. I don't know what Dusky you've got, and is that weight going to be a factor? Because though it's probably not as big of a deal, but the Yamaha weighs 562 pounds, somewhere around there, whereas the Mercury weighs 600, a little bit more, maybe depending on the model that you get. So you do have roughly a 40, 50 pound difference there. So between the two, you might have a 100-pound difference. I don't think that that's going to have any kind of performance changes on the way the boat's going to perform. I think that either or, I really don't think weight's going to be an issue. But if 100 pounds is an issue, I would consider that. But I highly doubt that that's even in the consideration of it because, twin 300s on the back of a boat, generally 100 pounds doesn't really change anything based on the length of the boat and the weight of the boat. Other than that, I don't have any really, the features as far as the stuff. The electric steering, I still don't have I don't know how to say that I'm still considering the electric steering. I'm still not on board a full 100% like, oh my goodness, I would get electric steering on my boat. Again, like I said earlier, I'm all about simplicity. I think simplicity brings reliability. And so when we start talking about JPO and Hellmaster EX and all the electric steering and all the other stuff with the sky hook and with the the stay point and the drift point and all this other stuff, you add all those electronics on a boat and you add all that electric stuff on the boat. Yes, when it's brand new, it's outstanding, it's awesome, it's cool, it's awesome. But for me, when I'm looking at stuff, by and large, what I deal with and what I own are 15, 20, 30-year-old products. So I buy boats that are 20, 30 years old. I run engines that are 15, 20 years old. I'm on the late stage of stuff. So when I look at things, like you said, what would you do on your personal boat? On my personal boat, I'm looking at something, okay, all this electric stuff is awesome, but you're taking all this electric stuff. It is all controlled by computers. A computer has to control everything. So all this fancy features, all this stuff, it's awesome when it's brand new, but it's on the water, it's getting wet, it's living in a super moist condensation, wet environment all the time. Take that, and now, a computer slamming through the water all the time, like taking abuse, take that and look 15 years into the future, 15, 20-year-old stuff that are electrical like that, that's when stuff starts to fail. And for me, on my personal boat, if you're the guy that's buying it brand new and running it for 15, 20 years and then getting rid of it, like all day, because you don't have to deal with it. But on the used side, like my side, personal side, where I'm running that old stuff, like that stuff is a legitimate concern to me, because take JPO stuff, for instance, these electronic steering cylinder stuff like that. You're talking about $7,000, $8,000, $10,000 steering cylinders, or $7,000, $8,000 computers that control the steering or the helms or the joystick. These components aren't just I need a $1,200 steering cylinder for my hydraulic steering system. I don't need I busted a $200 hose on my hydraulic line. That's not this kind of a problem. These are $8,000, $9,000 hits when you're trying to fix problems. It's not just, I got to change out my rocker switch and it cost me $50. I got to fix this and it cost me a couple $100. It's under $1,000. Break out another $1,000. No. When you start adding all this electrical stuff, it ain't break out another $1,000. It's break out another $10,000. So for me personally, I'm still on the fence on it, because 20 years into the future, 15, 20 years into the future, that stuff's a problem, and it is an expensive problem, even though it is the coolest stuff you've ever seen. I mean, to take your boat somewhere, hit a button and it stay there, that's amazing. But on the financial side and the having to fix it side, those are expensive repairs that need to be made. So what kind of rigging you get with it, since it's brand new and you're doing a brand new repower, going with all that stuff is awesome, because you're going to get 10, 15 years out of it. And then, whenever that stuff starts failing, which again, it's computers and electronics in the water, 15, 20 years from now, all that stuff's going to have problems with it. It's going to be a consistent problem that's going to need to be addressed. But by that point in time, you've gotten the use and the fun out of the boat, so it's not really an issue to you. So that's my 2 cents on that. As far as the rigging goes, Magnum Opus. If you test the engine in water and it works well, is it necessary to do the compression test? It is a used 2001 150 horsepower Mercury engine, and what would be a reasonable price for this engine? I got no idea. So yes, 100%. If you're buying a used engine, do a compression test. Even if the engine runs well in the water at a 150 2001, that's a 2-stroke, I would be doing a compression check just to see what everything looks like. Again, you have a 115 and a 135 PSI cylinder difference. that's telling you of a potential problem. So definitely do a compression check. If you're buying an engine, do a compression check. 2, on the price, a 150, I couldn't really tell you. It's a 2001. It's a 2-stroke. Is this an Optimax? Is this a XR6? I'm pretty sure they were still making XR6s back then. So which is it on that front? And then also, what's the condition of the engine? I mean, does it look all beat up? Does it have 5,000 hours on it? Does it have 100 hours on it? I wouldn't be paying more than a few grand for them, but I'm a cheapskate. So a few $1,000s would be the top that I would pay for it, because it's a 23 going on 24-year-old engine, 2-stroke. So, freshwater, saltwater, a lot of variables there. If it looks all busted and trashed out, then that's kind of those factors play into the price point of what you would pay for it. And one more, outdoorsman, is it better to buy parts from a dealer or online? Depends on what you need. A dealer is really great. You're going to pay more at a dealer by and large, but at the same time, some dealers you can get discounts, you can get different perks, you can get parts that aren't marked up a ton. So depending on the dealer that you're buying from, also, do you need the part today or not? Because if you need the part today, then you got to buy it from a dealer. If you don't need the part today and you can wait a week, order it online, you could probably save a few dollars. So it depends on your situation. If you need the part today, then obviously you only got one option of buying it from the dealer. And then also having a dealer relationship is a good thing as well. Not to mention that sometimes you need different stuff. So having that option with the dealer, and also sometimes you don't really get a deal buying it online. Sometimes the dealer has the same price as what you can get online. So at that point in time, buying from the dealer and getting it today, that there's a benefit to that too. So for me, I would shop around no matter what. But like I said, I'm a cheapskate, so I would definitely be shopping. I would look online, I would look at the dealer, and I would compare the price and weigh out the options. So that's my opinion on whether or not you should buy online or at a dealer.